Joining me is Reggie Van Lee, a retired senior executive, a philanthropist, a longtime supporter of the arts, and a proud Houston native. Reggie, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Tell me, what did you want to be when you were growing up?
Well, at the age of 4, I wanted to be an artist. At the age of 5, my mother told me artists starve and I should be an architect. At the age of 8, my mother said, architects take too long, I should be an engineer. And so I wanted to be an engineer because that's what my parents told me I wanted to be.
Amazing. When you chose to go to MIT out of high school, your counselor didn't think it was a good idea. Why not?
Well, what my counselor said to me was that I may be important for this little Black school in Houston, but that she would hate for me to go up to Boston and embarrass myself and waste my parents' money, and that perhaps I should go to a local school where I could compete better, which was very disappointing, but thank goodness I had many other people who were positive about my potential at an MIT, and so that's the direction I went in.
That could have been a turning point in your life, couldn't it?
It could have, and I'm afraid that for some other people, it may have been a turning point. People who weren't blessed enough to have family members and church members and friends who encouraged them. So I just thought that was a pretty horrible thing of a counselor to do to a kid.
Two of your guiding principles in life, Reggie, are confidence and courage. Did you ever lose confidence or courage?
I certainly had my moments where I lost both of them, but I regained them in time. I fixed that problem in time. The confidence thing, actually, when that counselor said to me I couldn't compete at MIT, I remember my very first physics exam at MIT, where you had all these people from around the world who were valedictorians from their schools, et cetera. And out of a possible score of 100, class average was 8. I got a 12, which at the time they passed out the exams, I didn't know what class average was. So a 12 out of 100, I mean, that's just, I'd never heard of that in my life, not me, you know. So I had my moment of confidence failing and thinking maybe my counselor was right. Then when they said class average was 8 and anything over 10 was passing, and freshman year was all pass fail, I said, oh, okay. And I looked to the guy to my left who got a 1.5 out of 100. And I said, well, I guess I'm not in such bad shape after all.
It was affirmation, wasn't it?
It was affirmation. It was affirmation. But I did have that moment that said, you know, maybe the hater was right. But I've been lucky every time I had those moments before it was too late. I got my confidence back. I put my courage where it needed to be.
You know, Chris Rock has a part of his comedy stand-up. He said, bullies and haters serve a purpose in our lives. Do you agree?
I agree. As a matter of fact, there have been times when in school I didn't want to stay up and study longer. I really wanted to go to sleep, but I could hear that counselor's voice in my head saying I did not belong there, and I was determined to make her not true. And I can tell you, when I graduated from MIT, she was still at my high school. I went back with my diploma, showed her the diploma, and as she proceeded to apologize, I said, no, you have no idea how much that encouraged me, that I was so determined for what you said not to be true. That was the extra push I needed. So my lesson always is there will always be haters in the world, and they do serve a purpose. They should serve that purpose of, I'm gonna make them not true.
On your journey from Worthing High to MIT to Harvard and the corner office, did you ever feel like you did not belong?
Many times I felt like I didn't belong. And even more times I felt really lonely in those spaces. Those were lonely rooms when you're in a room full of people that don't look like you, that don't share the same sort of interest. They don't want to go to the restaurant you'd want to go to. They want to golf or yacht and things that just were not on my list of ways I want to spend my time. And I used to complain to my parents. My parents passed many years ago, but I used to talk to my parents every day. And I would complain to my parents about it being lonely in these rooms, et cetera. And my father said one of the most profound things I'll ever remember, which was, it may be lonely at the top, but it's crowded at the bottom. And he said, you do not want to be on the bottom. And I said, you're right. So what he said, instead of cursing the darkness around being in that lonely room, bring others into the room that look like you. And so it's always been my challenge in life, whenever I get into an environment, to open that door and bring others into the room.
Reggie, what do you say to young people who may be growing up in the same neighborhood you did, who say, my parents don't have a lot of money and I have few options in life?
I say those are excuses. Plain and simple. I mean, those things that we don't want to do, we find excuses for. And those things that we want to do, we go after it. And when you can't achieve something, but you tried your very best, maybe it just was not for you. I mean, my mother told me, and I have all these sayings from my parents. My mother said, when you do your very best and things don't turn out the way you like, forgive yourself and move on. And that's what I tell young people all the time. Go for it. If it doesn't work, perhaps it wasn't supposed to work. Sometimes plan B is better than plan A, but you got to go after plan A. You have to.
Your dad was a mailman. Your mom was a nurse. You call them your biggest mentors. And I can certainly understand why based on what you've just told me.
Yes. And to this day, I still remember things they told me that at the time perhaps didn't have the impact it should have. But thinking on it now, the wisdom that they imparted, and in very simple language too, very basic sort of fundamental things, have been with me since, and I think will be with me forever. So still my best mentors were my parents.
When you were in college, you actually had an opportunity to meet the matriarch of the Kennedy family, Rose Kennedy, and you told me she reminded you of your mother. How so?
Well, my mother was a very dignified person. She was a person who required excellence from her kids, who had a certain presence about herself, about who would make sure you never felt less than anyone else, and that you always had to present yourself in a certain way. And just in that weekend at the Kennedy compound, I got so much of that from Rose Kennedy, and it so reminded me of my mother. So it said to me, no matter what your color, no matter what your economic situation might be, there's a dignity and a presence that you could have in your life. And people will connect to that and respond to that. And so my mother, being a nurse without a lot of money, was no less dignified and no less impressive than a Rose Kennedy.
You were appointed by President Obama to the Board of Trustees for the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts. How does that happen? Does he call and say, hey, Reggie, I need you to do this for me?
Not quite like that, but as it ends up, I've known the Obamas and many of the people in his administration for many years, from college, from Harvard, et cetera. And when they first were moving into the White House, of course, they reached to people they knew and they wanted them to take appointments in the White House. I was happy with my career at Booz Allen, not quite ready to do something like that. So they tried a couple of things that could have interested me, but finally they fell upon the arts and the fact that Kennedy Center board seats are presidential appointments. And so they called and said, we have another opportunity for you. And I was kind of not really wanting to hear it. And when they said Kennedy Center board, I said, that I can do. And I got the call directly from Valerie Jarrett, as a matter of fact.
I know you've been a huge supporter of the arts. And in fact, you studied ballet growing up and spent 10 months with the famous Alvin Ailey dance group in New York. What happened to that dream?
One has to realize that sometimes plan B is better than plan A. And I think my time studying dance and my time dancing at Ailey gave me a sensitivity and a context around the art form that would allow me to be a much better patron of dance. And I think that I've been a much better patron of the arts and patron of dance than I would have been a dancer. And certainly at this point in my life, I couldn't still dance at over 60 years old, but I still can contribute to the art form. So sometimes you have to accept that the Lord may have a different path for you than you think.
But when you're, 22 years old, was it hard to accept that, got to do something else?
Well, part of the problem was I had 2 degrees from MIT. I had an offer from Exxon to pay me $35,000 a year.
And what year was that?
This is 1980. It's
Okay.
And Ailey was paying a fraction of that and asking me to live in New York City. So let me see, $35,000 in Houston, Texas versus $10,000 in New York City. Didn't take long to figure out this is something I should at least try, but 10 months was enough of a test to prove that perhaps I needed to do something different.
Well, the arts is certainly proud to have you involved all these years, I am sure.
Well, I hope so. I mean, I always try to do my best and try to make an impact. And I do think that I've helped the arts in a significant way in my home city, in New York City, and Washington, D.C.
You love a quote by Mark Twain, who said this: "The two most important days in your life is the day you were born and the day you understand why." Do you understand why?
I think I understand why. I think that I understand what things brought me to this point in life. And then 3 years later, when something else happens, I re-understand why. And it's that sort of pursuit of that second day that's most exciting for me. I've never arrived at that second day completely. I'm always arriving at a second day, and then I learned that that was not the second day. This next thing that happened was, and that's what makes life exciting for me. But I'm always in pursuit of that second day.
In general, what would you say your purpose in life is at this moment?
I think that my purpose in life is to continue to open doors where people like me have not been, and to bring others into that room. I mean, I was able to do that at Booz Allen, where there are very few senior people that were Black, and now at KHOU, similar situation. But I am a trailblazer, a pioneer, whatever you want to call it. But my goal is not just to get there, but to get there so as to enable others to get there as well.
To leave the door open.
Leave the door open.
You built a compound in Wharton, Texas, and you got this idea after visiting the Kennedy compound while you were in college, so many years later. Did you think that would ever happen? I didn't.
When I was visiting the Kennedy compound in 1976, I said, just said to myself, wow, it would be nice to have a family compound. And we're a close family, and my father was always keen on family reunions and big events. And I said, wouldn't it be nice to have a place that we could live together? And not really thinking about, as we get older, wouldn't it be more convenient for us to be in the same space, but just the notion of us having a space to live together. And then I put it out of my mind, or seemingly out of my mind, for years and years. My mother passed in 1998. She left me a piece of this family property out in Wharton, Texas. And she beseeched me before she died to not let this property go, to keep paying the taxes and hold on to the property. No plans for it other than just to keep it. And not knowing at that time that it wasn't just this 1 acre, but it was multiple acres of land that my great-grandmother purchased in 1899. A freed slave from Louisiana came to Wharton, Texas, and in 1899 with her husband purchased this land. If she was able to achieve that, how dare I let this land go? And so it took me 9 years to get back the full complement of land that was the original purchase that she did. And that's when I said, now what am I going to do with all these acres of land out in Wharton, Texas? That family compound. That's the way that it came together. So, and quite honestly, I wasn't sure if my sisters, all of us living in Houston, and all of them having homes in Houston, I wasn't sure if they'd be willing to move out to the country. But the minute I proposed the idea to them, they said, let's go now. Let's go right now. And so
isn't that wonderful?
Great.
Yeah. I wonder if you ever sit on your property, Reggie, and think to yourself, I wonder what my ancestors would say about this.
It's funny because after we finished the house being built and we had a big opening of the house, et cetera, one time I just happened to be out in the very back of the property behind a man-made lake we put there, and it looks into the back of the house and it's expansive and everything. And I actually just sat there in tears thinking about, wow, one, this was done, this dream that I had that many people thought would never happen. And two, is this not a tribute to the hard work and the life-changing things that my ancestors must have done to get the property and hold on to it all those years? It really is very gratifying. And people who come to the house, you can kind of feel in the house and in the property that ancestral connection. You really can feel it. It sounds hokey, but you really can feel it.
You are writing a memoir, but you're not done yet. Why not?
Well, I spent the first year of my retirement. I retired in 2016 from Booz Allen, and I've now gone back to work. But at that time, my first year of the retirement, I spent writing my memoir, hired a writer to work with me, et cetera. And what I discovered is writing a memoir is not easy. You have to go through so many rewrites and rewrites and rewrites. And so I think I kind of fatigued of the rewrites and said, let me just put it to the side for a minute. A year went by and I realized that my story has not ended by far, that my second day wasn't getting to retirement and building this house, that there's another second day that's coming. So I wanted to get that down on paper. So it's there. If we need to publish it, fine. But I'm continuing to write my story, and I will continue to advance my memoir in that way.
What do you think the name of your memoir will be, the title?
Well, we've gone around and around on that. And the title I like the best. When I was 8 years old, I was in the house during the school year, in the living room doing schoolwork, and the other kids were out playing. And my father came to me and said, you know, I appreciate you studying. I think studying is very important. I want you to get a good education, but I want you to have a childhood as well. So why are you not outside playing with the other kids? And I told him, Daddy, because I want to be somebody. And he said, I want you to be somebody too. Now, I don't remember that, but my father told me that story so many times once I was old enough to remember it. So I think the title of the book may be Somebody.
And
We'll
with
see.
that, there's nothing more to say. There's nothing more to say. Reggie Van Lee, it's been a pleasure. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much.